Let's go ahead and get started. Um, this, everyone, is the Agile Austin coaching group, and we meet every month here via Zoom. We are very lucky to be sponsored by Agile Austin, which is a nonprofit here, a 501c6. Here's all the fun preamble that goes along with it. We have sponsorship through Agile Velocity, who honestly has kept Agile Austin going for several years, so we're very grateful to them. And by the way, fun fact, Steve, our speaker tonight, is the principal enterprise coach there at Agile Velocity as well. We have sponsors, gold sponsors like Kasasa, Eliason Group, Agile Rising, and Leading Agile. And then we also have silver and bronze sponsors, and we are extraordinarily grateful to all of them for helping, number one, keep Agile Austin to be one of the premier Agile groups within the country, but also making it possible for us to bring lots of interesting speakers in and have conferences like Keep Austin Agile, which was just last month. We are also very lucky here in Austin in that we have so many different groups, the special interest groups. You can almost go any night of the week and find something. So leaders, Kanban, Agile at Scale, DevOps, QA, Scrum Masters, architecture, coaching circles. We've got them all. So if you are interested in any one of these groups, please feel free to reach out and we will help get you connected. So tonight, kind of the basics. This is the coaching group for Agile Austin, and we really want to help practitioners dive deeply into Agile coaching. Brittany and I have gotten much more experimental over the past year in just bringing in whatever we can. So we're always willing to try new speakers and the like. But we meet the first Monday of every month here at 6:15 until 7:30. When we are in person, we will be down at UShip, which is where Brittany works, but they are also a wonderful in-person presence here in Austin. They've been our sponsor for years and have really generously donated time and facilities and made it possible for us to have a great meeting space in person. My name is Erin Randall, and I am an Agile coach, an organizational coach, a coactive coach. I have my own practice, Ad Miliora Coaching. We also have Brittany, who is, we lead this SIG together. She is the Agile manager, music and dog lover, but she is also down at UShip here in Austin. So upcoming meetups, we are not taking a break for the holidays. Note to self, Brittany, when we talk on Thursday about changes we want to make for 2021, scheduling a break, let's do that. Okay. But next month, we are going to start the year off with Melissa Betts. She leads the Agile Leadership Network over in Houston, and she's going to be talking about navigating diversity and inclusion within Agile team dynamics. In February, Mark Spitzer is going to take us through some OKR work. And in March, Alex Benitez, who is a UX designer for Macmillan, but he does a lot of work with teaching and psychological safety. I've given him some free rein about what to talk about, but he'll be coming in March to discuss that with us all. But tonight, the main event, the main speaker, the man that we have all been waiting for is Steve Martin, and he's going to be talking about lessons learned from coaching Agile leaders. Steve, as I said earlier, is the principal enterprise Agile coach over at Agile Velocity, but I also know that he is getting a PhD, and he has perhaps the best cat name ever of Pound Cake. I'm pretty excited about that. So Steve, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. I will stop sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. My goodness, there's nothing like going to all day of Zoom meetings. And then what do we do here for fun? We come to a Zoom meeting. So yay. So I appreciate everybody being here. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's with leadership. And let me go ahead and share my screen. I should be sharing my screen, hopefully. Let me double check something here. share the correct screen. How is that? You see, hopefully a slide?
That is, yes.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Let me put this in full view here. Yay. All right. So, as Aaron mentioned, might have done something a little crazy. In addition to all the coaching and everything else, I started to say, hey, I've got, free time. Why not do some more studying? And so I've been working on my doctorate primarily in leadership, primarily in change. But what I'm going to share tonight is some of my, I should call it lessons learned from leadership coaching, coaching and specifically the leadership area. For folks that know me, one of my favorite phrases, which I heard from one of my favorite leaders, I would work for her at any time, every time again, is bless your heart. Oh, that's a great idea, bless your heart. So I've had many bless your heart moments in my career. So hopefully we can learn from several of those here today, especially when it comes to coaching leaders. Because when it comes to coaching leaders, there's some interesting facts that are out there. When you've got some really good leaders that are part of their organization, they're 3 times more likely to have more talent, energy, and motivation from their employees than those, bless your heart, not so much. And we start thinking about, what it takes to do some coaching for leadership. There's some interesting dollar figures that are out there, globally. It's, over $350 billion with 166 billion in the United States alone. And when you started to break it down and what are people doing from in-person instructor-led training to, virtual training at this point to executive coaching, about 2/3, just under 2/3 of those folks out there get some sort of coaching. And so when we start talking about leadership, and it's specifically within the Agile space, there's just so many definitions of leadership out there. And so when I start thinking about, what is leadership, what I really wanted to do for tonight's conversation was focus down a definition so we can put a little bit of context into what we're going to be talking about tonight. And so tonight, I'm going to basically focus in on who I'm going to consider those either that executive level, director level, manager level, those persons that have that formal authority. They have that title. So they have either some direct reports, they're responsible for some sort of profit and loss. They have a directive that they have been told that they have to execute basically towards. But these are also the folks that have some sort of strategic responsibility, whether it's coming up with a strategic plan, executing a strategic plan, going back and forth between the two. But there's an element of strategy that they have to do. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, the accountability is theirs, but they're going to get their stuff done through other people. And so I just want to put a little bit of that context of, when we're talking about, coaching for leadership, I'm going to be focusing mostly on the folks that are kind of in those, middle to upper echelon areas. Now, just to kind of get an idea of who is here, let me go ahead and throw into the chat window here briefly. There is a 2-question Menti survey, 2-question. You can either do one of 2 things. You can go to the chat window, click on the link, and it'll ask 2 little questions there. Or if the link somehow is not working for you, you can just go to a browser, you can go to your phone, or anything like that. You can go to menti.com, and it will ask you for some numbers, and those are some of the numbers that you can throw in there. But if you could just take a minute or 2 to answer those 2 quick questions, and we'll get an idea of some of the folks that are here. All right, so let me just kind of toggle my screen over here into Menti. Aha, we have some people already answering the questions. So let me go into presenter mode here. And so hopefully you're seeing some bar charts. Yes. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, so if we can just take another minute or two, I see that we've got like 33, 34 folks and 19 folks that have entered some information. We'll see if we can get a couple other folks here. Yeah, when it comes to leadership, um, it's amazing going through some of the work for the doctorate and doing some of the leadership research that's out there. Literally almost like the billions of articles that it feels like that are out there. And when you start factoring down into leadership for Agile, and we'll talk a little bit later, how we're trying to change some of that wording towards leadership in agility. I think it's been kind of interesting. So I'll give us about another 15 seconds or so. Again, we got the link in the chat window. Also, you can go to menti.com, enter those numbers. It looks like we might be slowing down with some of the folks. All right, so it looks like we've got an interesting mix of folks. We have some external folks here, internal Agile coach. It's kind of cool. I'm seeing that flip around a little bit. I used to see a lot of external coaches, so I'm seeing a lot more internal now. So I'm glad to see that. It looks like we got some Scrum Masters POs, where you do an element of some coaching and then no formal coaching responsibilities. Interesting. Okay. And so let me go to the next page here. Let me flip this down. Let me escape this. So how much do you how much time do you spend coaching leadership now? So we have an interesting mix here. So by and large, most of the folks are 50% and less the time. I happen to be in that category. That's over to the far right. I spend a vast majority of my time working with leadership. And so when we start taking a look at some of the lessons learned, hopefully we can have some of those that tend to have a little bit more experience share their experiences with the folks that may not have as much with the other folks. So yes, we're going to be doing a couple breakout rooms and stuff like that today. And so hopefully we should have some fun with that. All right. So when we start talking about working with leaders, those folks with the formal authority, those folks that have people reporting to them, getting work done through other folks, I find that there's about 10 different areas that I tend to coach on, And we're going to get ready to do our very first breakout room here. And Brittany, we're going to do a 7-minute clock, on the breakout room. What you're going to do is you're going to go see these 10 different things that are available to you on little sticky notes, little Post-it notes. And what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to take a look at the little scale that I have there. And I'm just going to have you as a group, after you introduce each other, move those sticky notes along the little axis. Do we think those things tend to be more team-oriented coaching? That'll be towards the left-hand side. Or do we think that the things are a little bit more leadership-oriented coaching, more on the right-hand side? Or you can put it somewhere in the middle if it's got elements of both. All right, so where are we going to do this little exercise? I'm going to put a second link in the chat window. We're going to be using a tool called Miro. And so hopefully you've had a chance to use a tool like this. So if you could go click on the Miro link that's available to you. Let me come over to my Miro here. And as the folks are coming in, I'll share with you a couple little tips and tricks for us to navigate through the Miro. So I see we got about 14, 15 folks that have entered into the Miro board. So we'll give it about another minute or so for folks just to kind of make sure that you're in there. Just kind of curious for the folks that I see on the camera, how many have used the Miro tool before? If I can see people raise their hands. I see a couple people going, nope. Okay. So as people are coming in, yes, I'm sharing my screen. However, let me just do a quick little introduction to probably two buttons that you'd want to know. Up here in the upper left, there is this little toggle switch up here, which is called Hide Collaborators Cursors. See how I can see everybody across the screen? That can get very annoying. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off. So I'm going to hide all the cursors. Bam. Okay, there everybody goes. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got the zoom. We can zoom in by clicking on the plus, and you can zoom out by clicking on the minus. If you want to do it by keys, you can hit the control and then the plus, or then the control and the minus. So you can do it that way as well. The last thing that you might want to know about is this little select tool up here. Usually when you enter into Miro, it's got you toggled onto, see my little thing is a hand, it's the grab. You can grab stuff, but you can't really point and click on stuff. And so you want to toggle that so it click, so it's the little arrow key. Those are probably the three things that are the most important. So what we're going to do is Brittany's going to get you into breakout rooms of about 5 people each. These are those 10 actions or 10 typical topics that I was mentioning. And you can just sit here and within your group, just come down here and drag it along that axis. My suggestion is once you get into your breakout room, find a facilitator because 7 minutes goes by very quickly. All right. So get into your room, find a facilitator, say hello to everybody, and then start your facilitated discussion. And when Brittany gets you into a room, what you're going to find is we've got different work areas. We've got a work area for breakout room 1. Just keep kind of scrolling over. We got a room for breakout room 2, 3 and 4 and so forth. So just make sure as you start moving stuff around, you're in the right breakout room. So, Erin, am I forgetting anything in terms
I
of?
don't think so. And sadly, I have breakout room control, not Brittany, but I do have all of the breakout rooms set up and ready to go. So don't forget, if you are in room 1, you go to breakout room 1 over in the Miro board and find a facilitator. And with that, I'm going to send you all to breakout rooms and I will bring you back in 7 minutes. 1, 2, 3, go.
Another 15, 20 seconds left for the rest of the folks to come back. And for the folks that did come back, yay, welcome back. We'll ask 1 or 2 groups to kind of share their experience about how that exercise went. So, all right, so it looks like we've got a majority of the folks have joined us back. Welcome back from all the breakout rooms. So I'm looking for maybe 1 or 2 of the rooms to share what that experience was like walking through those typical challenges and figuring out where on that spectrum to put those challenges. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Just 1 or 2 groups.
I'll go because I know how painful it is to be a presenter and nobody volunteers. So,
thank you, Lisa.
So I was in breakout room 3, and ours largely kind of fell towards the middle. We had sort of differing opinions about whether everything should just be dumped in that middle category bucket, or if some things lean slightly more towards team level coaching and some things leaned more towards executive level coaching. But on the whole, I think there was general consensus that in order to be aligned as an organization, everybody needs to have exposure to all of these things. And so that everybody can understand across these paths about who needs to know what. And even if you're not defining strategy, for example, understanding how strategy is defined will help you understand it better and help you be aligned on the organizational goals. But there are other things that, maybe leadership would focus more on than a team would, and vice versa. So we were kind of largely, bell curved around the middle there, where the vast majority of things, I think, should be pretty much everybody gets the same coaching.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right down
Yeah.
there.
And I'll share from that team as
Yes,
well.
thank you.
Lonnie here. Yeah, so what I'll very much what Lisa said is true. And one thing I would say to the point about where some of this belongs, it does depend also on the size of the organization and kind of how many layers of even leadership there is. Because if you're in a smaller organization, yeah, you're going to have this more where a lot more people are involved at every level versus I work at IBM. So there are just certain decisions that are going to be made somewhere else. And you just have to acknowledge that and know that coming in, even though to Lisa's, to totally agree with what Lisa said of the information has to flow down, but in terms of where the decision making happens, that may live elsewhere.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, I would love to actually pick on breakout room 2, because it seems like breakout room 2, yours tends to be a little bit more stretched out. So if I could have perhaps a volunteer from number 2 discuss what their experience was like.
Yeah, this is Jaime. I was a facilitator. We were a quiet group, and I thought, let's just get into it and start moving things. And so I invited the team to start placing stickies where they thought it would go. Visually, as you see, we did pick some 2 stickies that were at the endpoints, and then we just filled in the rest. And then we had a discussion about where we might have some disagreement. And the one that we did discuss a lot was the strategic plan execution, where we felt it needed to shift left. So, but that was our approach, was like, let's just place things, let's see if we have any disagreement, and let's see what we need to move so that we can discuss.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I find that whenever you do an exercise like this, what becomes more important is the discussion you have within the group rather than the actual placement of the things. And so while we've got team number 3 that has a very nice spike in the middle and almost like a very narrow bell curve, it was important for that particular group to have a common understanding of a lot of those either skills, viewpoints, capabilities shared across not just leadership, but teams as well. But when we start taking a look at, maybe team number 2, it could be for that organization, maybe stretching it out a little bit, and you've got clear definitions from one end to the other. That could have implications as well. And I love, Lonnie, what you were saying is, it really is dependent on the organization, the size, how many layers you have, what is a leader, what is a leadership, all those things come into play. And one of my big ahas that I had, working on my doctorate, is that there are literally probably more definitions of leaders and leaderships and structures and all those than we possibly have time to read. And so when we start taking a look at leadership, we have to apply a context there. And so that's why it becomes so incredibly important to have that context. But regardless of the context, some things that are kind of interesting have come out of one of the studies that I really like out of Google. And I'm sure that many of you have heard about the Project Oxygen, which started back in 2008, when Google was like really accelerating their growth. And they said, hey, you know what? I'm not sure we even want to have managers. Why should we even have managers in the first place if we're going to self-organizing, self-managing, we're hiring smart people, they'll figure it out. Do we need managers in the first place? And so they collected data that starting back in 2008, and they've repeated the study again about 8 years later. And here's what they found. You take a look at the behaviors of, quote, those best managers, the people who are going to start to target with some of this leadership coaching, that's kind of like that base layer, and then we're going to work our way up to the executives. Look at all the things that you see on the screen here. Coaching. They are a good coach themselves. They empower. They have an inclusive environment. They're productivity and results oriented. Communications, their support. They have a clear vision, strategy. They collaborate. They're strong decision makers. It's really interesting. Out of this list of 10, there is only one that is, I am good at this job. And I found that really interesting. And you take a look at a lot of the leadership literature that's out there, things that have been written about, you know, all the way back from the like 1920s and before. It's amazing how much all these things that are highlighted in green, you know, 1 through 7 and 9 and 10, those are really the elements of what we see as some great leadership here. But here's kind of the funny thing. And one of those studies that I'm just like, yeah, okay, this kind of makes sense. Unfortunately, those people who tend to be promoted into those leadership positions tend to be the really good technical individual contributors. And I have to say, I was not selected for my relationship skills when I became a manager for the first time. I was a really high-performing individual contributor, and I was just vastly unprepared for what it took in order to become a manager, and which really I really thanked somebody when they turned me onto this book, probably a little bit too late, is, you know, there really wasn't that switch to flip to say, okay, bing, you're now a leader, go lead. You know, it's a different thing to look at because we have to look at ourselves, we have to look at others, we have to look at teams. And all these things have challenges. Should we even be a leader in the first place? What are our motivators? How do we interact with people one-on-one? How do we interact with people in a group setting? And so there's just a lot of challenges that are out there. We're going to do our second and final breakout thing for tonight because I'd like to hear a little bit about some of those leadership challenges that you might be experiencing out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Erin's going to put you back into a breakout room. Let me go grab the link one more time. I'm going to stick it into the chat window so you can get into the Miro board. We're going to go to the next little area called the Coaching Leadership Challenges. And all right, let me just shift this here so I can turn this on. Bam, there it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to again put you back into breakout rooms. Just take note of which breakout room you go into. So breakout room 1, you'll be doing your discussion and recording a top challenge 1 here, top challenge 2 here. And we, of course, going to have breakout room 2, 3, 4, etc. So just make sure you're in the right spot. Okay, so let's go ahead and put 7 minutes on the clock. What I'd like for you to do is share 1 or 2 experiences that you've had. Let's, you know, make sure you come back. And if you are in a place where you can share something that's non-confidential, you know, be ready to share maybe 1 or 2 things. So Erin, let's go ahead and put 7 minutes.
We're ready, and you will be in different breakout rooms this time. So hopefully you will see some new faces.
Yep.
And here we go. 1, 2, 3.
I think we have almost everybody back. All right. You know, you all are overachievers. I asked for just 2. I'm looking at what I see here. Are we saying that we might be challenged with some of those leaders?
Competitive. We keep seeing the ones next to us keep going, so we just keep going.
It's a competition. All right. So as I kind of mentioned right before we went into breakout rooms, if I'm looking for just 1, maybe 2 people to share something non-confidential, I'm going to leave it to you to jump in.
So for group 6, who are the non-competitive ones, because we only did 2.
All right, go for it, Mike.
We talked about agile mindset being a key for, being able to coach those folks,
Yep.
actually wanting to learn, wanting to get curious, wanting to change, wanting to iterate. And if they don't have that, that can be a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And then the other one we talked about was transparency. And some cases, as an outside coach going in, they can't share some information with you, whether it's proprietary or whatever. And so they can't share that information with you, even if you have an NDA. So that can be a challenge to work with those folks to figure out a way to get around some of those things that they can't share with you as to why they're making decisions the way they're making them, and those types of things. So that transparency can be a huge challenge for a coach to work with folks.
Yeah, especially with that NDA. There was one Wall Street firm that I was working with, amazing offices, like all glass offices and everything like that, the conference rooms that were all glass. And when I was working with that team there, they got to points in the conversation where they could not share the information or the situation with me. And so they asked me to go outside of the room, sit in the corner, and then they had the automatic shades, but they were really slow. And so you had like the really slow automatic shades going down. And it was also a secure facility. So I couldn't have a phone. I couldn't have a book. I couldn't have a newspaper. I just had to sit there until the shades magically came up really slow, went back in the room. Oh, you need to go back out again. It was comical. It was
Cone of silence.
Yeah, it was like the really slow cone of silence. But yeah, so not being able to discuss and have those free and open conversations, that becomes really challenging. So just from an interest of time, I want to make sure that I get us folks out of here, on time as reasonable as possible. You can read through some of the other challenges that, especially when you're coaching leadership, it does bring a different, higher level challenge that is out there. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again here and kind of go into some of those lessons learned that I've had over the years with some of my clients that are out there. So let me pop this up here. And so I'm just going to kind of do this hopefully in a hopefully a 10-minute read through, so you can kind of get an idea, and we can leave some time to answer any of the questions. I'll stop and pause after the end of each of the lessons to see if there's anything I can add to it for each one of those. These tend to be kind of generic, but I find that when I have these, especially these first 4 that you see here, they help guide me a little bit, especially when I work with leadership. The first one has to deal with, one particular client that I worked with. This person said, you can be as direct with me and as brutal with me as you want to be. I want to know the truth. That person also said, I'm really, really busy. And so my expectation is that in 15 minutes, don't even say good morning. I know you're here. I know you're going to say good morning. Let's just get into it. All right. So first session, I get in there and I explain a very touchy situation. And I notice that person starts to tighten up right away. And 1 or 2 sentences later, he starts correcting me on my own language. Well, I think what you meant to say was, no, I just, and he's telling me what's in these reports. I'm like thinking to myself, I'm the one that's doing all the research right now, and bless your heart, that's not what that means. And so and it became almost very combative, and he's like, I am not angry. I'm like, yes, you are. Yes, you are angry. And so this is when the idea of having a good coaching agreement becomes really, really essential. Because when you go into these relationships, especially with the leadership, we've all seen these definitions before, of what is teaching, mentoring, consulting, coaching, facilitating. Are we going to go in there and share some knowledge with them? Are we going to teach them something? Are we going to walk through our experiences and give them 3 or 4 things to choose from? Are they looking for a consultant? Tell me something to do, or are we actually going to do coaching? Which is, how do we collaboratively come up with a solution and really figure out how they can own it, or am I going to facilitate something? And so I really want to make sure, especially when we come to coaching, that they know that it's going to be working in a collaborative relationship where they are going to drive what the agenda is. I'm not going to come in there pre-prepared with, oh, our lesson for today is da 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 da. Now, if it comes along the lines of like, hey, could you get me more information, a case study on, could you get me the data for, of course, I'll bring it, or I'll do it as a follow-up. But, it's really about having that collaborative conversation. And you really want to make sure that you explain with your leader that you're working with is that I'm not here to solve your problem. I'm here to help you help yourself through these, and that becomes really, really one of those key things. The other things that I really like to see in that coaching agreement is a confidentiality kind of clause or a confidentiality discussion. In all my years I've been coaching, I've only had to breach that twice. What constitutes breach? If they're going to hurt themselves, they're going to hurt somebody else, they're going to hurt the client, they're going to hurt the company, something where there's imminent harm. And I'll just let people know that, that's really the only situation, and the time where I actually had to break it and I had to talk with that person's supervisor, it was not exactly a fun situation. So let me share with you a couple different ways that I like to look at confidentiality agreements. If you really want to go a written route, this first link, and again, you're going to get a copy of the slides. This first link really kind of goes into like a 2-page agreement. And so that's what this one is here. Now it's written for a coach that's in Australia, but I think you can take a lot of the same language here. It goes over, what is the coach commitments, you as a coachee, what you commit to, and some of the ethics that are there. And so this is a nice example that you could use if you really need to write everything down, dot by dot by dot. If you want to have something that tends to be more of an online approach, again, but still written, I like this one from the UNC School of Medicine. It's got, okay, what's your role as the person being coaches? What's the role of a coach? What coaching is not? And they make you click the button, I understand, And so this is another approach that you could use when it comes to, coming up with an agreement. And then this third link that you have right here in the middle is just kind of a list of what this person feels are those top things necessary in order to have a really good coaching agreement. So having understanding of what the sessions are going to look like and what you're going to talk through becomes absolutely essential. So that's lesson number 1, being on the same page of what is coaching. The second one, and it becomes really important, especially
Hey, Steve.
Yes, Todd.
Is question about that. Is that something that you do mainly as an outsider helping a leader in a company? I'm trying to picture doing this as an employee of a company with a leader in that same company.
Yeah, if I tend to be internal, it tends to be more of a verbal.
Okay.
If it's more of an external, then I tend to have it more written.
Got it. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Thanks, Todd. And then I see Lisa's put 2 fantastic guides that are in the chat window. So I encourage you to take a look at those as well. The second lesson that I have is, especially when it comes to leadership, and you look at all the challenges that you all put in that second breakout room, a lot of those challenges had to do with almost kind of like the individualistic and the individual change. Yes, there are some quote external things, culture, organizational, but if you look at primarily those challenges that we saw with the leadership, is that we need to take a look at that individual and make sure that we are addressing those individual needs. And so there are three that I like. And these are the three that I've typically used and I've had some pretty good experience with. There's the DISC, and it also sometimes comes with the business motivators. Allegedly, hypothetically, if you go to this website, to this address, you can get it for free. Otherwise, you might get charged $250. I'm just saying allegedly, you might want to use a junk email, hypothetically. Okay, so but you can get the DISC analysis and you know, get some of the goodness that comes out of that. So what is the DISC analysis? It really basically is a classification of not only quote your working personality type, but it usually comes with some business motivators, what drives the behaviors that drive into DISC. So you usually get those two reports that come together. It also usually comes with what is your preferred communication style, things that make you, things that help accelerate you, things to watch out for personally. And so when you do something like a DISC, and again, it usually comes with the business motivators with it, you can get some insights into what that looks like. And the other ones that, of course, the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs. Now, for both of these, just a word of caution, you know, make sure that you got the appropriate training for each one of those, because they can be, there's a lot to both of those. And the last one that I use comes from Harvard. It's a career leader. So if you find you have a leader that you're working with and they're unsure of if they even want to be in a management position in the first place, this could be something that's worth it. This one is $95. It does take a good 30 minutes to fill it out. It's a pretty long survey, but I find it's really comprehensive to find out what your personal drivers are. So I find that that one pretty good, works out pretty good. And even when you have that information with some of those online assessments, these are the ones that I typically use. You know, getting into those coaching sessions and understanding the drivers and getting to know the folks one-on-one. These are some of the powerful questions that I like to use. You know, what made you become a leader? What does success look like to you? And that can be very open. Tell me a little bit about your culture of the organization. What do you feel you can do? What do you feel you cannot do? You know, what's limiting you? What's constraining you from a culture perspective? Is it a culture fit? You know, so we can start to talk about those different things. Net with lesson number 2 is you need to understand what their drivers are and what their goals are so that you can start to coach and work towards something together. That's my second one that I have there. My third one relates to paying attention. And this all kind of gets down into some emotional intelligence, you know, your EQ, especially when it comes to leadership. It's all about trust, all about trust. And so you don't want to be doing a trust fall like what you see here on the screen. Hey, let's do some extreme trust falls. That's not what we're trying to do here. You know, if you think about the stress that many leaders are under, especially when we come to the COVID situation and operating in ambiguity, oof, you know, we want to make sure that we've got a strong base of trust that's there. One of the studies that's out there and that says, okay, what should you pay attention to in terms of like book knowledge and those social skills, EQ, working with people? They say it's about an 80-20. 80% working with people, social skills, 20% of what you know. You can take a look back at Project Oxygen that we talked about with the Google study. They had 1 skill out of 10 that was related to IQ. 9 out of the 10 in Google was related to all those soft skills. So we want to make sure that we've got that good emotional intelligence. Goleman has some great stuff out there. He's very prolific, lots of stuff out there. But basically what we're trying to say here is we need to figure out ways to take a look at 2 things. On one spectrum, we've got the self and then working in social situations. And then this other axis here, what we're going to call recognition, understanding who I am, and regulation, the things, the actions that I take. He's saying everything starts with self-awareness, and we can work our way into social awareness and into relationship management. We also need to have that self-awareness going into self-management that gets into relationship management. A lot of coaches that I work with, especially for leaders, try to start with relationship management first without understanding themselves, without understanding how they talk to other people, without understanding what your own personal buttons are. I've got my own personal buttons when I coach, especially with leaders. And I'm a pretty calm person when I work with leadership, but when I got that one person pushing that button, pushing that button, pushing that button, I better know what my self-management is. And I need to be aware of what those things are to keep myself in check so I can still help my client. So having that self-awareness and getting the other parts of self-management and social awareness, those three things are essential for you to build. Don't go just into the relationship management piece. Now, how do you build this? Quite honestly, I do feedback probably a lot more than a lot of other coaches. I almost retro almost every single meeting. What worked for you, what didn't? You know, constantly asking for feedback. Probably I annoy my clients. Didn't I just give you a feedback last week? I'm like, but that was last week. You know, constantly reading, looking out there, constantly looking at self-evaluations, and constantly having a peer work with me where it is appropriate, And so those are all the different mechanisms that I like to use to kind of increase some of that awareness. So emotional intelligence being the key, especially when it comes to working with leadership, becomes really important. We got two more things and then we'll open it up for questions. The next one, and we've touched on this already, is to work gradually. My favorite thing is, and there's a client that I've worked with that literally tried to change 8 or 9 things all at once. Well, clearly, trying to change 8 or 9 things all at once, and this was like in a 3-month time period. There was a little bit of churn. And so each kind of change that you have out there, I say, has like this little blast radius, has little ripples. And so you want to make sure that those ripples are big enough to actually do some change out there, but not too big that is just going to kind of blow everything up. When it comes to leadership coaching, again, we're going to focus on the EQ, the 80%, the soft skills. And so really emphasizing those relationship skills becomes one of those things that just takes time to do. This is not something that you can really just turn on the tap and get there right away. Because the people who do these things, who go into leadership, usually takes years to get into that position, and some of those behaviors need to be unlearned. As we take a look at the things that got people to success in the first place, that provides a sort of history of, hey, here is what I got here to be success. So I'm going to keep doing this over and over and over again. But the world changes. And so the things that got you here are likely not going to be those things that are going to get you to that next step. So we have to break some of those paradigms, unlearn some of those things, and that's uncomfortable. And I find that there's a lot of executives that I work with like, this worked for me back in 1984, I'm not going to change. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to get the results that you had in 1984. If you are okay with that, go for it. You know, but, you know, again, especially in a COVID world, those approaches that we had back then typically need to be altered for today's reality, for today's world. Let me throw a couple bonus things in here. This is when I tend to say, thank you for the meeting. I appreciate it. It was lovely to meet you. but I don't think this is going to work out. I've turned clients down before, usually with one of these things that you see here. They don't want it. They don't need it. There was one person I went into that basically told me, I don't need you. The only reason I took this meeting is because my boss told me I had to. And then that person, within like 30 seconds of me sitting down, that person just swiveled their chair and started working on their computer. What would you do in that situation? I'm like, oh, fabulous, wonderful. Can you tell me what's working out well for you? Of course, I got the rolled eyes, and I eventually got a conversation going. I'm glad you got it all figured out. Could you tell me? Because I'd like to know. So I turned it into, why don't you mentor me? And then we eventually turned the conversation around. So keeping it going.
Well played, Steve. That was on the spot thinking. I'm like, I don't know if I would have had the good job.
Yeah, I think there were like 3 total sessions with that person. I'm like, you know what? I'm so happy for you. I'm glad you feel like you've got it all figured out. Things are working wonderfully for you. If you ever need anything, a study, a use case, a case study, hit me up. And we eventually, about 6 months later, after the rest of those person's peers were out performing, that's when the peer pressure. Anyway, I can't go in and fix somebody. So that's not going to work well. If you are not going to have the time to grow, and you're not going to put your own effort into it, kind of goes back to the coaching agreements. Like, hey, you're hiring me. I would love to see you with your success, but if you don't have time to apply the learns, if you can't make it practical, you're wasting your time and your money. So I want to make sure that it's, really being a good use of their time. And then lastly, when somebody says, I need you to guarantee me that we're going to get 10% more productivity, whatever that factor is in there, I'm like, oh, it's like going, yeah, this is not a guarantee. What I can do is, from a leadership coaching perspective, is share with you all the case studies in the world that say, folks that tend to do this indirectly see X, Y, Z, and you can just pick it off the list. But those are those people at that situation, in that time, with that skill set, in that environment. So you can't just take a case study and apply it to you. What do you want to do? You are your best case study. And I can't guarantee that. And so when I see things like that, I'm like, okay, it's just for right now, it's not a fit, and it's okay. And it's okay. So while I've hit a lot of lessons learned in a lot of different areas, these are pretty much the 4 that I run into pretty much all the time. So if we can be on the same page, understand them, their drivers, their goals, know that I have to work on me as a coach so I can help them, and work in gradual chunks, and be able to say, you know what, it's okay. It's not a match for right now. It's okay. And not taking that personally. It's okay. Coaching is a very personal thing, in my opinion. And so making sure that we've got a good coaching relationship with the right person, they're investing their time, their money. Let's make sure that it's a good match that you have there. So those are just some of my limited lessons learned from leadership. What I'd like to do, as I'm answering some questions here, I am going to go back into Miro. I'm going to open up this little takeaways box so we can, if there's anything that you've learned that's resonating with you, you can pick one of these little post-it notes and start typing some stuff in there. But let me kind of turn it over to see if there's any questions or anything I might be able to share as we start wrapping up for this evening.
So if you do have a question for Steve, please go ahead and take yourself off mute and shout out whatever is at top of mind for you. And Steve, thank you. This was lovely, both interactive as well as really useful and practical. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I was just going to say, I think it's your last point there on when not to coach can be kind of a tricky one to navigate, the, you know, sort of guaranteeing some increment of change, right? I know a lot of our contracts are deliverables based, and that's exactly what we have to agree to and guarantee. And of course, we define what we think is reasonable, and that's part of the coaching, is to coach them on what is reasonable, because there are certain things that you can achieve within a certain time frame. So it can get very tricky to understand what is something that you can agree to that is a measurable increment of change within a reasonable time frame, because you know it takes a lot to try to convince someone that change doesn't have a deadline or an expiration date, right? It's ever evolving, and it's directly related to the effort you're going to put into it, right? And so it puts us also sometimes in a tricky position when you have a contract based on a deliverable, because your deliverable depends entirely on the teams or your leadership team, you know, doing their part to make it happen. And hopefully you have good enough clients where that's not an issue, but you can find yourself in a difficult position, right? On those things, you just have to be very judicial about which ones you agree to. So yeah, it's,
Absolutely. Yeah. We're very cautious as well of putting in quote guarantees in writing. And when we do that, we say, okay, corollary, you also agree, ... You know, so when you're an external consultant, I think that becomes very important. But I think Todd had a great question earlier. What do you do when you're internal? You know, you don't have a quote contract.
yeah, my advice to anyone who's doing internal coaching and trying to do an agile transformation is to run. You know, it's the profit is never loved in there, or whatever that thing is, you know, right? Like, because you are guaranteed to be hired by the person who wants you to change their organization, and as soon as you start to do it, you're going to be changing what they put in place, and they're not going to appreciate it. It is so much harder to be an internal person than it is to be an external person.
Yeah, I do find that if I can pair with somebody who's internal, we can almost get to a point where we can almost like tag team, because the person internally knows where the bodies are hidden. They know the history, they know the personalities. And if we can work with those people to then have the quote tough conversations, and then, you know, I've been internal as well. I know that I've been there many times where like, hey, this is what I would do. Here's a da 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 da. Nobody's listening. But the minute I spend $20,000 on a consultant to say the exact darn thing that I just said, sometimes you have to do that. And it's as frustrating as it is. Sometimes that's some of those things that just unfortunately happen.
And pretty much unilaterally. I mean, I always get that. The people who hire us are always like, we've been saying exactly what you just said for 3 years and nobody's ever listened. And now within 3 weeks, we've got this entire thing changed in the organization. And Nick made a great point too in the chat. You know, you always have to find your ally. And as an external person, you always find your internal ally, someone who can help you navigate the minefields and dig up the dead bodies or not.
Yeah. Absolutely, because it is a group effort to do organizational change. It's not up to one person. It takes time. It takes time. Well, if you've got some other takeaways, I'm going to again throw into the chat window the Miro board. Oh, Miro. We're going to rename that. If there's any key takeaways that you'd like to share, I'm going to hang on the line in case any other folks have some other questions. And so again, I'm sorry, Aaron, remind me, what were we going to do with the PowerPoint and the Miro? board?
So what will happen, everyone, once we have the recording edited, we will be sending it out. You'll get that email through Meetup, people who signed up there. And we'll try to include relevant links and everything there too for this. And if not, hold on. You can always just reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will be posting things there as well. And I can, try to shepherd you in the correct direction to go find this information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'll hang on the line here, but the rest of you have a great night, and see you around.
And we will see everyone back in January. Melissa Betts is going to be talking diversity, inclusion, and agile team dynamics.